you like getting stuff for free? Do you also like taking small risks with huge payouts? If you answered yes to these questions, I think I've got the deck for you. This is Mufasa Highroll and welcome to my ultimate deck guide. By the end of this video, my goal is for you to be comfortable enough to build Mufasa and climb the Pixelborn rank ladder or take it to your local events. In this guide, I'll go over everything you need to know. That includes general strategy for the deck, key combos to keep an eye out for, the Mulligan, and much more. At the end, I'll also cover 3 of my own games against the top meta decks and explain my thought process so that you know how you should also maneuver in these matchups. The general strategy of the deck is pretty simple. We use the old reliable set 1 draw engine of Rapunzel and Surfer Stitch, along with some new set 2 additions, and we create some crazy tempo on the board and put the pressure on our opponents. Combine this with the insane control tools that Ruby has for the late game, and we should be able to comfortably win the game from the start. And that's not to mention the card that the entire deck is built around, Mufasa. Mufasa is an inkable amber card that costs 5, has a free stat line, and can quest for 2. While these stats might seem a little lackluster, it's the effect that we're interested in. This card reads, when this character is banished, you may reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's a character card, we can play that character for free by the end of play exerted, otherwise, we put it to the top of our deck. In our deck, we are typically running 56 or even 57 character cards, so the chance we hit a character is astronomically high. These are our best targets, but it's also important to note that even if we hit our cheaper units, it still generates value and tempo for us since we still have a presence on the board. But if we're feeling super lucky, we have the chance to hit some insane removal tools in Maleficent and Lady Tremaine. We can also get some really strong card draw engines such as Surfer Stitch and Rockstar Stitch. And in certain cases, our Mufasa will hit another Mufasa, which just creates this loop of just a never-ending character that the opponent just cannot deal with. And when they do finally get around to dealing with the second one, then there's a good chance that we're going to hit even more removal on an even bigger character. Even if we miss our high cost cards, the effect is still super strong. Let's say Mufasa hits our 1 cost queen. This is fine because it still enables us to utilize shift, so we can pay only 2 ink for a character that would have otherwise cost us 5. Sure, we do need to have the 5 cost queen in hand, but it's these flexible scenarios like this that make the deck as strong as it is. This also stops us from top decking our weak cards, so we have a higher chance to hit our big targets. If you played at any point in set 1, then you'll know just how strong Rapunzel and Surfer Stitch were as a card draw engine. In this deck, we use both of those, as well as Rockstar Stitch, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. Set 2 gave us one of the best Rapunzel targets you can possibly have in Mother Gothel. This card is a 2-cost free 4, which is very strong, but it enters play with 3 damage on it, which is the perfect number for Rapunzel to heal and draw you 3 cards as early as turn 4. One of my favourite things to do with this deck is to play Mother Gothel and a Lantern on turn 3. This is because you can play Lantern first and then tap it to make the Gothel cost 1, so you can play both of them. And this is good for a number of reasons. The first reason is that it gives less time for your opponent to react, because if you play Gothel on turn 2, the opponent has 2 turns to then remove the Gothel. The other reason is that it gives us so many options. Because we have a Lantern out on turn 4, we can play Mufasa as early as turn 4 if we want to do that. Or we can play Rapunzel without tapping the Lantern. Or in the scenarios where you have no ink, which is very unlikely with this deck because we don't run very many uninkables, we can play the Rapunzel for free ink, which we definitely have because we had that the last turn, and then we can draw into more cards to find the ink that we need for the turn. Another really easy option to go for is to play Rapunzel and Gothel just together on turn 6 to guarantee your free card draw. Overall, this engine is just very consistent and reliable. Surfer Stitch is another great way to draw cards, and probably my favourite card to hit off of Mufasa. The card is good at all points in the game. If you can hit it early game off of Mufasa and draw cards, great. You've got some insane tempo heading into the late game, as well as a really beefy unit to just gain board control if you didn't already have it. Because of this large health number, it also makes for a great Rapunzel target. And in the cases where you hit the Surfer Stitch off of the Mufasa and you don't have 2 characters, just to body enough is still worth it, because you're essentially upgrading from 3-3 to 4-8. Another game plan for us to fall back on is the Rockstar Stitch game plan. You can get this card out as early as turn 3 if you find all the right cards, and although we are primarily running some really heavy cards in the deck for targets for Mufasa, we still run a lot of 1 costs and 2 costs. As mentioned before, this is because we can shift on top of them. It also gives us some really aggressive tools and lines of play that normally we wouldn't be able to pull off. Even in the cases where Mufasa hits Rockstar Stitch, even just playing 1 or 2 cheap characters to draw cards is still a great way to consistently get to the late game. Speaking of the late game, there's not really much more to say than we just have Ruby in this deck. That means we just have 4 Tremaines and 4 Maleficents. These cards are just Dragonfires on sticks, And if you can hit them off with Mufasa, great, you have insane tempo going into those stages of the game, and if you don't, you still just have them to fall back on to grind out the last remaining parts of lore that you need to close the game. Now we have a solid idea of what it is the deck actually wants to do. How do we get there? Well, it all starts at the Mulligan. In my opinion, perfecting the Mulligan with any deck is the most important way to ensure consistent success. At the start of each match, we should make a checklist of important things that we're going to need. The first thing I look for in this deck would be a way to draw cards. Rapunzel is ideal for this as she can be played super early. Having both her and Gothel is really strong, but to make sure we aren't being too greedy, just Rapunzel here is fine. The next thing I want is some ramp. Since our deck has a lot of expensive cards, being able to play them even just a single turn earlier can win us a game here and there. We run Lantern and Dock. Lantern is ideal as in most games it will be on the board for the rest of the game. Just make sure not to play right into those pesky Benjers or Judies. Dock is good because we can maintain tempo while still getting cards for cheap. Dock is great in this deck as if we can play him on turn 3, it opens us up for the insane turn 4 Mufasa, which enables us to rocket ahead of our opponent as we can start getting our Surface Stitches, Tremaines or Maleficents as early as turn 5. It's also important to note that these cards stack, so in certain cases we can play cards on an insane budget. Another key thing to look out for is the man himself, Mufasa. While we have games where we can get Mufasa out early, just sticking on Mufasa on the board turn 5 can create a lot of problems for your opponent. The last thing is to make sure you're putting back any expensive cards, like Maleficent Dragon for example. This is because we want them in the deck for Mufasa to cheat out later on. While in some decks you would want to keep these expensive cards just to ink, Mufasa Highroll plays a little bit differently. A passive effect of doing this means that we're going to have all of our cheap cards in our hand for the super early game, and we can also keep an eye out for those early shifts as that's another way to create tempo and get us safely to the mid game. In this example we can see that we have a strong 1-drop in the Queen, we have Rapunzel for card draw, so what we need to do is we need to find a way to kind of bridge these turns together. A really important thing for the Mulligan is to plan out your first couple of turns to make sure that you're effectively starting the game off as strong as you possibly can be. So in our current hand, our turn 1 is as follows. So we go the Queen on turn 1, and then on turn 2, we can play Simba to protect it. We don't have a turn 3 play yet, but we do also have Rapunzel for turn 4, which we can use to heal the Simba back up, or make a favourable trade and then heal and draw cards that way. So in this game, I chose to replace Rockstar Stitch, one of the Simbas, one of the Queens, and one of the Maleficents. The reason I'm getting rid of the Rockstar Stitch is because I don't currently have a 1-drop Stitch in hand, so the shift really isn't likely to happen, and we want to keep our expensive cards in our deck for Mufasa to hit. The same thing with the Maleficent, it's really expensive, so we ideally want to hit it off of Mufasa later on, but in some cases, if your hand is good enough, you can just keep it for ink, but in this deck particularly, I don't like doing that. I also get rid of one of the other 1-drop Queens and a Simba. In hindsight, you could probably keep these to ink, as it keeps the expensive cards in your deck, and gives you a way to create ink to actually play the game. So if you want to keep Simba and Queen here, you can. I think, looking back on it, I probably would have kept the Simba and just got rid of the Stitch, Queen and Maleficent, but let's see what happened. Okay, so we found some really good targets. We found our Shift Queen, 2 Mother Gothels and a Maleficent. So we now have a way for Rapunzel to draw some cards reliably, we have some cards that we can comfortably ink, and we have a really strong tempo plays for the first couple of turns. This hand also creates a really strong turn 1 to 4 game plan for us to follow. We can go Queen on turn 1, and then depending on what the opponent does, if we want to go wide, we can still play the Simba, or if we want to create tempo, we can shift onto the Queen. Turn 3, we can play Mother Gothel, and turn 4, we can use Rapunzel to heal the Gothel, draw 3 cards, and we should have a really strong board with a lot of tempo going into it. We also have cards like Simba, Maleficent, and one of the Gothels to ink to get us there. If we look back at our 5-point checklist, then we can see that we have card draw, we only have one expensive card in Maleficent, which we can just ink, and we have an early shift. The only things we're missing are some ramp and Mufasa. Not having ramp is perfectly fine in this situation since we have turns 1 to 4 already planned out, so all we really need to do is just find Mufasa for turn 5 and we're looking pretty good. So as a result of our really good Mulligan, this is our turn 4 board. We have a way stronger board than our opponent, having 2 characters to 1, and we have way better stats too. We can make a favourable trade with our Mother Gothel onto their Winnie the Pooh if they choose to quest with it. We also have more cards in our hand. In this case, we have Mother Gothel and Rapunzel, so on turn 6 we can draw another 3 cards. We have Maui for board control, and we have a Mufasa for the next turn, turn 5, which is where we really want to start having our really impactful plays. This was just one example of how to mulligan, but in the gameplay section I'll go over all of my thought processes for all of the mulligans, so you'll get a couple more there too. Before I get to the combo section, I just want to say, if you've learned anything from this video at all, I would greatly appreciate a like and a subscribe. These videos take a lot of time, and just little things like that really help me stay motivated to make more. Speaking of which, I've got the Discard Ultimate Guide coming out at some point next week, so keep an eye out for that one. Where this deck plays quite like a traditional mid-range deck, there's not many 2 combos you want to look out for, so I'm not going to spend too long on this section. A combo I've already spoken about too much in this video will be the Rapunzel and Mother Gothel combo. I'm just going to say it one more time here, as this is a super important combo to keep an eye out for, as it's your main way to draw cards in the deck. And I previously mentioned how good Surfer Stitch was with Rapunzel, just because it has such a high health pool. But one card I haven't mentioned yet is Maui. Maui has Rush, so you can guarantee damage on the Maui for Rapunzel to heal at a later time. So just having a way to consistently set up damage and just leave it there is a really good way to ensure that you draw some cards. On a similar note of healing cards, I haven't spoken about this card yet, but 2-cost Snow White has the effect of healing some damage off of your characters. This is great at healing your characters just to continue controlling the board. Even if you have to heal a Mother Gothel not to draw cards with Rapunzel, just having that stat line for the cheap cost is really worth it. Another combo that I've briefly touched on was the Dock and Lantern into Mufasa on turn 4. This is super important, as getting Mufasa out as early as possible is key to ensuring as much tempo as you can possibly get. Another card I've not spoken about yet is the Snow White. This card has a similar effect to Hades, where you can recur some cards from your discard pile back to your hand. Hitting a Snow White off of Mufasa is great, because when we quest with the Snow White, we can just add Mufasa back to our hand to continue the tempo that we already had. It also gives us the option to look for our late game tools again, so we can find more Maleficents or more Tremaines to just continue removing stuff from our opponent's side of the board. This is a super simple deck list just for anyone who wants to just jump right into the deck. It has all of the tools I've spoken about in this video, so you shouldn't have any problems picking up as quick as possible. In the gameplay section, I do run some different iterations, but I'll be sure to mention it when we get to that part. There are lots of different cards from the Ruby and Amber inks that we can put into this deck, as it just generally plays like a mid-range tempo deck. The first card I've seen played is Ratigan. This card is good at controlling the board, but ultimately I found it to be a bit too slow for the stats, and just having uninkables is not really something that I like doing, especially not for an effect that's not really that good. Another uninkable Ruby card would be Scar. I actually like this card, but I just couldn't really find the room for it in the deck, so when you get around to building this deck for yourself, definitely give this a test and see if you like it or not. This character is great at just completely wiping your opponent's side of the board, and because it's a character, if we hit it off of Mufasa, then it instantly opens us up to just maintain tempo, and we can keep him healthy with the use of Snow White and Rapunzel as healing tools. The last Ruby card I'm going to talk about is BLT Mickey Mouse. This card is evasive and quests for 4, so if you can hit this off of Mufasa, you're probably going to get a lot of tempo. I think in a different metagame, this card can be really good, but currently, with Ruby running a bit rampant, there's just a lot of removal for it. And the same goes for Steel. Just having so much damage being spread around the board, BLT isn't really going to stick for long, but in those games where you want to end the game as quick as possible, it might find its way back into the deck at a later time. Similarly, there are a lot of Amber cards we can utilize in this deck. The first one I'm going to talk about is Hades. When you play it, you can return a character card from your discard pile to your hand. This is a great effect, but because we're already running Snow White, I think that card is just a bit better, especially because we can shift it for the same price as we can play this Hades for. Another great card that we can utilize from Amber is Friendly Face Mickey Mouse. This card makes our other cards free cheaper, and also quests for free as well. I think in future sets, if we can get some more card draw, then this card finds its way into this deck for sure. But right now, we already have enough ramp to kind of get our expensive stuff out anyway, so I think this is just kind of overkill. We don't play any actions in this deck, but if I was going to play some actions, I'd probably play Teeth and Ambitions and Be Prepared. The reason I don't like playing them is just because I like Mufasa hitting every single time, or nearly every single time, at least with this deck. Teeth and Ambitions is a really good target because our evasive Minnie Mouse has enough health to take the hit from Teeth and Ambitions and still survive and quest quite aggressive. Although I think the deck has enough tempo tools to not have to use Teeth and Ambitions and risk the Mufasa missing. Be Prepared is a fantastic card, but like I've said with a lot of uninkable cards, I don't really like running them, and also if you're getting to Be Prepared turns, then you're probably too far behind anyway, so it's kind of just one of those cards that you're playing in the very fringe scenarios and it might work. Although it's great for Mufasa, it just doesn't really help us out too much. And finally, if I was going to run any more items in this deck, I'd probably run Dinner Bell. It's a really great source of card draw, and it can combine with our characters really well, and we can also use it to banish Mufasa. It's a card I definitely would add if I was going to put more time into this deck, but I think just for a baseline basic guide of how to play the deck, I don't think it's needed. But if you guys want to test this and put it in your own decks, that's perfectly fine as well. It's probably high up on the priority list for myself anyway. Okay, onto the matchup sections now, and I do have some gameplay which I'm going to go over in the next section, but I'm just going to make some quick bullet points of stuff you need to know before you go into these matchups. Versus songs, this deck is the king of hand advantage and tempo, so we're going to need to find a way to out-tempo our opponents and play a really fast early game. The main thing we're going to want to play around is board clears. This is mainly Tinkerbell and Grab Your Swords. We don't want to overextend into these, and we don't want to go too wide, so it's always important to note when your opponent has a Singer 5 on the board, or when they're about to hit 5 ink, so they can play these cards. The next thing we're going to want to be keeping an eye out on is Cinderella. This card is devastating, as it can start trading away without us really doing any damage to it. It can also sing a lot of songs and attack our ready characters, and it also quests for free. So this card is devastating, so we're going to need to deal with this as soon as it hits the board. And because it has the keyword shift, that means we're also going to have to deal with these cheaper Cinderellas as well. One way to do this is to make sure we have enough ramp in the early game to start playing our Maleficents and Lady Tremaines as soon as possible, and keeping our opponent's side of the board relatively small. If they can start snowballing with their Cinderella, the game is basically over for us. On the note of card advantage, if you don't know what that is, it's basically just when the opponent has more cards in their hand than we have in our hand. That means that they've basically got more options than we do going into the next turn. One card that Songs has that's really good at generating this advantage is Beast. It allows them to draw a lot of cards, so we need to put some damage on it as soon as possible to just deny the card draw. Speaking of card draw, of course, Songs has a whole new world. This card is make or break in the matchup. We want to essentially throw out our whole hand and make them whole new world us into 7 new cards so we can continue our tempo. We need to make it really awkward for our opponent to play this card so that they're not just playing it for free and just going out of control with their tempo. There's some really good examples in the games upcoming, so keep an eye out for that. Aggro is an archetype in Lorcana or card games in general that if you don't know how to play against it can really just mop the floor with you straight away. So we're going to need to be prepared for this, and with our deck it's kind of simple. We're just going to be mulliganing for our cheaper units, and we want to go wide early game to make sure we have more units than our opponent so we can make favourable trades and just outpace them really quickly. Key thing for this is to look out for early shift. An early shift into Queen is going to be your best friend in this matchup, as you can start taking away their attack and adding it to your characters, so you're essentially just killing their stuff for free. And even if the opponent's characters do have attack, we have lots of ways to heal our characters back up to full, so we shouldn't have any problem against aggro as long as we're prepared for it. The last deck I'm going to talk about is Ruby Amethyst, but you can also kind of use these tips for the Popsicle matchup as well. Where these decks want to go to the super late game, our goal is to just go super fast. We're going to want to find these early shifts, we're going to want to go as wide as possible, and we're also going to want to play out our evasive minis as early as we can. This is because Ruby Amethyst has a really difficult way to deal with evasives. Mufasa is great against Be Prepared, because as soon as they spend all 7 of their ink to clear the board, Mufasa is hopefully going to give you a really big character just to continue the aggression, but we can't allow them to Be Prepared us twice. We're ideally going to want to be threatening lethal by the time that they have their first Be Prepared ready to play. So in this first game, I'm against Songs. I decided to get rid of my Surfer Stitch and both of my mini surfers. So all the surfers basically gone. I'm keeping one surfer in hand, just because that enables us to have a turn 1 to free play, which is essentially looking for a turn 4 play. Thankfully, we do find a Queen and a Dock. This means we can go turn 2 shift into Queen, and then we can go for the Dock on turn 3 and turn 4 Mufasa. So we're looking quite good. We don't know what deck we're playing against just yet, so we see our opponent Ink Rockstar Stitch, and then they're going to go ahead and play a Cinderella. This tells me that they're playing Hyper Aggro or Songs, so I got to be ready for both of them basically. So we're going to go ahead Ink our mini, since I don't think I'm going to need it, because I'm going to be playing Dock on turn 3. Go for my Queen. This is going to let me go for my Queen on turn 2. Like I say, that I can go Dock on turn 3 and Mufasa on turn 4, so that's kind of our game plan already planned out for us. The opponent is going to clear our Queen, so that tells us that they are now playing Songs, so we know exactly what our game plan should be, and it should be to basically go as fast as we can. I'm going to Ink this Rockstar Stitch just because I don't think I'm going to need it, especially in this matchup. If you go for a bunch of small units, then they're probably just going to get wiped out by Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell anyway. So I opt for Simba instead of Lantern, since I already have some ramp and I just need something on the board. In our hand we have a Mother Gothel, which is a perfect target for the Rapunzel if we do draw it. The opponent drops to turn 3 Ariel, which isn't the best, and we see them take Grab Your Sword. So now we know that they have Grab Your Sword, so we can play around that. They choose not to quest of anything, which tells me that they might have a Shift Cinderella in hand, possibly. So I'm going to go ahead and Ink this Queen since we missed it on turn 2, so there's no need for it in this hand right now. I'm going to go ahead and play the Dock. Makes the most sense to me. It's better than Lantern, but the thought process here is if they have a way to clear this Dock, then the turn 4 Mufasa is kind of no longer a good plan. So maybe here you can go for a Lantern instead, but even in that way of playing, they could just Benja away the Lantern. So both options here aren't necessarily the safest, but I opt for the Dock here. It's mainly placed for the tempo as well, so this means I have a unit on the board. Opponent's going to ink another Rockstar Stitch. So we know they're 2 down now, so we're not really expecting a Rockstar Stitch at this point. Opponent's going to shift into Queen, so the opponent has a really strong board right now, especially compared to our Doc and Simba. But after the next turn, we should have our Mufasa on the board, so we should be feeling a little bit better. So we're going to go ahead and quest with our Doc to get the cost reduction. We're going to ink this Simba since we need to go for card draw if we do find Rapunzel at some point. Drop the Mufasa, and then I'm just going to quest with everything. I'm going to quest with the Simba mainly just to protect this Doc, so I can get so I can keep the ramp basically. Opponent's going to ink Cinderella. This tells me that they probably have another Cinderella in the hand that they're ready to shift. Which, yep, there it is. Now, this isn't looking too good for us, I'll be honest. This matchup is quite difficult if your opponent does get ahead, but the key thing to note here is that my opponent only has 2 cards in hand, and our board state is... we are behind in our board state, but it's fine, right? Mufasa can still hit something good, and the opponent only has 2 cards in hand. We have 3 cards in hand. The opponent doesn't know that our cards aren't too good, so right now I'm expecting them to play a whole new world at any moment. They're going to go ahead and sing Grab Your Sword, which is fine. We don't mind Mufasa getting taken out here, and we don't mind the Simba getting taken out either. That's why we quested with it, because it has Bodyguard. So basically here, we're just kind of hoping that Mufasa can hit us a really good target, so that we can take out this Cinderella and regain back board control, and we're going to force the opponent to whole new world us. If we can get the opponent to use whole new world here, this is great because we're getting rid of all these bad cards in our hand and just finding new cards. I do top deck a Simba, so it's not exactly what we're looking for. But because I'm expecting a whole new world here, I think it's best to kind of just play out my turn as I would before I do anything with my hand. So I'm going to go ahead and trade this Mufasa and see what we hit. We do hit a Minnie Mouse, which is fine. It's an evasive target, which means it's going to force the opponent to use some removal. And then I'm going to go ahead and play both of these lanterns, I think. The reason is because I'm going to try to empty my hand out here, so then when my opponent does get around to playing Whole New World, then we're seeing 7 new cards, and we're just getting everything we have on the board now to kind of get as strong a board as possible, so this Cinderella doesn't just completely wipe us out. Opponent's going to play a second Queen here, so it's really not looking good for us. There are multiple top decks in the deck that will help us out here. Rapunzel is a good one because it can heal our Gothel and draw us some cards, which then gives us back the card advantage. Another one could be a Lady Tremaine. We could even find a Maleficent at this point, and a Maui is great as well. So a Maui is going to allow us to take out the Cinderella and put us back in quite a good spot in this game. We're going to trade our Gothel and our Maui into the Cinderella, which is quite a hefty trade, but it's the key card that we're trying to get rid of in this matchup, and we've done that. We still are behind on the board, but it's fine. I choose to quest with just the Mini here because it has evasive, so it's relatively safe, and I don't want to quest with this Doc because it's still giving us those ramp options, and the Queen can just take it out for free. So my opponent's going to go ahead and quest with both of these Queens. We are still in top deck mode, but like I say, there are loads of outs here, and as soon as we can slowly claw our way back onto this board, we're looking fine. Thankfully, we ink the Maleficent. We don't have enough ink to play it just yet, but now I have it, it's really strong, and I know that I can start a comeback in this game. Even if my opponent uses Whole New World here, it's still fine because that's all of their ink gone, or they're choosing to sing it with a Queen, which slows them down on the board. My opponent quests with both their Queens, which tells me their hand isn't too strong, and they don't have a way to deal with this many. Thankfully, we top deck an inkable card. We don't run too many uninkable, so it's quite unlikely, especially since we've already got 2 lanterns on the board. So I can go ahead and play both these lanterns and this Doc and play a Maleficent on the board for only 6 ink, which is really solid. This alone is going to buy us back into this game, and we're going to force our opponent to use Whole New World. Based on how they've been playing, I don't think they have it, or they've been just holding it while they have the board control. So go ahead, end my turn. Now I've regained back board control. I still am down on card advantage, but based on how my opponent has been playing, I don't think they have much to do anything with. They're going to play a Grab Your Sword, which is going to get rid of our Doc, sure, but everything else is still totally fine. They're also going to play Strength with Raging Fire to just finish off the Mini, which is, again, totally fine. In this board state, we're looking quite good. We top deck a Maui, which is fantastic, meaning that we can keep our Maleficent alive, and we can keep the Maui alive as well. It survives with 1 health. So now we have 2 damaged characters on the board, so a Rapunzel top deck here is going to be fantastic because it's going to draw us some cards. But other than that, like I say, I don't think the opponent has much. We find a Mufasa, which is just fantastic again, another great mid-game tool. And then I'm just going to keep questing with this Maleficent until we can eventually close the game out. My opponent's going to go for a Simba, so like I say, I don't think they've drawn much. We find another Maleficent. We can't use it because we haven't got the dock anymore, but we can just go ahead and quest with Mufasa and Maleficent. And now really with 5 ink, there's nothing they can really do to come back in this game. So that's going to be a win against Songs. They didn't have Whole New World there, but I just want to make a point of we purposely played to a point where they were forced to use Whole New World or lose, and they didn't have it, so they lost. But if they did use it, we're still in a great spot. So that's how you ideally should play around the Songs matchup. We did quite a nice comeback there, so basically you just want to take out the Cinderella and force them to Whole New World you into a favourable position. Okay, this time we're against Aggro. Again, I don't know that I'm against Aggro because I'm just playing Pixelborn Ladder here. But I have a lot of expensive cards in my starting hand, so I'm going to get rid of all of them. I'm going to keep Rapunzel because it's card draw, and I'm going to keep the Stitch and the Simba because it gives me a safe turn 1 and turn 2 to play out. So ideally here we're just looking for a turn 3 and Mufasa. We do find Mother Gothel, which is going to allow us to draw some cards, and we also find Rockstar Stitch, which is going to allow us to shift on turn 4 if we want to do that. We're going to ink the Surfer Stitch because it's the most expensive card, and every card in my hand is kind of playable other than that one. So I'm going to go ahead and play the Queen here. The idea is if I can choose between both Stitch and Queen, I'm going to play Queen every time on turn 1 because there's a chance I can top deck the Shift for the turn 2. I see my opponent play a Amethyst Maleficent, which tells me straight away this is hyper aggro. There's no other deck in the current meta that is playing that card, so I know exactly what my game plan is. Simba is cool and all, but I'm going to go ahead and ink it so I can go super wide here and just have a lot of stronger characters. Simba would be fine as well, but I think just having 3 characters with 2/2 stats is going to allow me to trade a lot more favourably. I do also have the Mother Gothel and the Rapunzel for card draw, and I can shift onto Rockstar Stitch at any point on turn 4 onwards. Rockstar Stitch is going to basically act as a kind of heal for the Stitch as well, just give it a lot more health, and just give it a lot more trade power, really. My opponent is going to play a Simba, so thankfully we did play 3 units here, so we can trade in all of our cards to just clear their board, which is ideally what you want to do, because as soon as Hyper Aggro runs out of gas, it just kind of stays out of gas, and you kind of just win from that point on, because they're not really trading much. We're going to play our Mother Gothel on turn 3. In that deck, there's no way for them to deal 1 damage, so it doesn't matter if we play it on turn 2 or turn 3, but because we played it on turn 3, it means our turn 2 characters can trade comfortably on this turn. So as you can see, straight away, turn 3, we have 2 characters on the board, and my opponent has nothing, so we should win, honestly, just from this point forward. We do have less cards in hand, but we do have Rapunzel, which is going to draw us 3 cards, and I know for a fact that my opponent is only really playing cheap characters, so they're going to be playing a lot of characters at a time. So I do see Pinocchio here, which is scary, and I see a Maleficent, so they are still questing for an awful lot, so I still don't really have time to misplay. So I'm going to go ahead and ink this top deck Maleficent, play our Rapunzel, which is going to allow us to draw 3 cards, and also heal our Gothel, which means it's going to be able to trade for a lot more. And then I do go ahead and pass here. I think realistically you do just quest, at least with the Gothel. You can not quest with the Stitch if you want to get the shift, but you definitely quest with the Gothel there, so I don't know why I didn't quest, but if you're in this position, definitely go ahead and quest with the Gothel. My opponent is going to just go ahead and quest with both of their cards, you know, just kind of what Aggro wants to do, turn their cards sideways and hope they can win. And then they are going to play a Snake, which is going to bounce back their Pinocchio. So that means that they can go ahead and play the Pinocchio again, basically just saving it is basically what they've done there. They do still have 1 ink, so they can still play another Maleficent or a Lilo if they have it. So they are going to go ahead and play another Maleficent. So their board is still looking quite scary. Even though we've played quite well up until this point, other than the missed quest with Gothel, it's still looking quite scary. We do go ahead and top deck Mufasa on turn 5 as well, which is great, so we can just go ahead and ink this Surfer Mini and play the Mufasa now. Mufasa is great because we're going to trade with it, and then as soon as it's done trading and just banishes itself, then we're going to get a fresh new unit to trade with. We do go ahead and quest with the Stitch and the Gothel. I think here as well you kind of want to be aware of the Madam Mim Fox because it has Rush, so that can take out our Rapunzel, can take out a lot of stuff. So I think just questing with everything here is fine, because if they do take out the Rapunzel, then we still have safe units to trade with anyway. Opponent's just going to play it quite safe, ink a Befuddle, nothing too crazy there. And then they're going to quest with the Maleficent, play the Pinocchio that they bounce back, and play a second Pinocchio. Now this is really scary. My opponent does only have 1 card in hand, so as soon as I can clear this board, I'm feeling quite comfortable. They do quest with the Mim, so they're already at 10, they're already at 10 lore, which is quite scary. So I've got to go ahead and do some trades here. Thankfully they quested with the Snake, so I can go ahead and get 3 damage on the Gothel, and then use a second Rapunzel to draw 3 more cards. This is all well and good, but I still need to deal with these Pinocchios relatively quickly. I go ahead and use my Mufasa to take out the Maleficent. In retrospect, I probably should have just traded my Stitch here, and it gives me an extra point to quest with the Mufasa, but overall it's fine. So from here I've missed 2 points of lore, so if I lose this game 20 to 18, then that will be the 2 misplays that I've made. As you can see, we've already established a very dominant board of our opponent. We're just kind of trying to not let them get to 20. They're going to go ahead and quest with both the Pinocchios, and they're going to play Mim again to bounce back another Pinocchio and play it. So our opponent does have enough on board unexerted to quest for game. Thankfully, we do have a Tremaine in hand, so I can go ahead and hit into the Pinocchio, get rid of it, and then I can play the Lady Tremaine, get rid of the Snake Mim, and then kind of I'm just hoping that if they have a goat at this point, then we just lose, and if not, then we win. I did have a couple other games that I wanted to showcase against aggro, but I thought this was a really good example of just quite a close game. My opponent does only have 1 card in hand as well, so we can quite comfortably assume that they don't have the goat, especially since we've seen them ink 1 or 2. I think they've inked 1 at this point. But because we've seen that, we can kind of assume they don't have it. But if they do have it, well, that's just how it goes with hyper aggro. We've done our best, we've established a really good board, we've drawn a lot of cards, and we've made favourable trades. Sure, we have missed a couple quests here and there, but it's just something that you need to learn from, especially when you're playing against hyper aggro. You don't really have a moment to think, but we're just kind of waiting here to see if the opponent has the goat. And they play our friends on the other side, so we know they don't have the goat. They're going to quest with the Pinocchio up to 19, and that will be the game. So that is how you should play against aggro. You basically just want to clear their board out. Make sure that you're healing your characters to keep them on the board. Just basically establish a really dominant board over them, and then just let them run out of steam. Okay, so for our game against Ruby Amethyst, I'll be honest, I didn't really see many Ruby Amethysts on the ladder. And I played a lot of games with this deck, and I know that's quite a weird thing to say, but I just didn't find any, so this is the best win I could find out of the 50 or so games that I played with this deck. For the Mulligan then, I see 2 Maleficents, so we already know we're getting rid of both of those because we want to hit them with Mufasa. If you don't know that at this point in the video, then go back and rewatch the whole thing because you missed a lot of important information. I'm going to get rid of one of the Surfer Minis. I have Doc and Surfer Mini as my turn 3 drops, and I also have Mother Gothel, which enables us to draw cards if we do find Rapunzel. Okay, I guess I do also get rid of Doc. I wouldn't recommend getting rid of Doc there. I think keeping Mini and Doc is good because it gives you a lot of options for your turn 3 play. It enables you to have turn 4 Mufasa. It enables you to have ink in your hand. It enables you to go aggressive if you want to play Mini instead. It enables you to just have a lot of options. So if this is your mulligan, I would probably keep both in that certain situation. I do find some card draw with Rapunzel, so I know for turn 4 I'm going to be drawing off a lot of new cards. I do find a 1-drop with Queen, which is quite nice. No 2-drop just yet. And I do find one of the Maleficent Dragons back, and a Maui, and an uninkable Lady Tremaine, so not a good mulligan from me there, but you've got a lot to learn from that. So of course we're going to go ahead and ink the Maleficent Dragon. It costs 9, there's going to be a long wait if we keep that in our hand, so we're just going to get rid of it now, make sure we've got some ink, play our Queen. It's always good to have a turn 1 play, and also we can find the turn 2. My opponent is going to ink a 1-3 Mini and play a Pascal. It tells me that this is definitely Ruby Amethyst because they've played 1 Ruby card and 1 Amethyst card, obviously. I top deck a second Maui, so I'm going to go ahead and ink my other Maui, quest with my Queen, and pass. So here I know this could be Ruby Amethyst aggro because they typically do run the Pascals. So I have to keep in mind that I might be playing against an aggro deck, but I might also be playing against a control deck, so don't want to make too many rash decisions just yet. So my opponent's going to ink a Friends on the other side, which straight away tells me that their hand is not too good at all. Top deck a Lantern, so I think here you can either play Lantern, which in this situation with this board, I feel like it's totally fine to do that. Although, and then if we do that, we can just use the Mini for ink. Although I do opt to ink the Maui and then play the Minnie Mouse. The reason is because when they play Pascal, it's going to get evasive. Mini can trade just really happily into that. I'm going to quest with my Queen because they can't trade the Pascal into it. And I'm not going to quest with my Gothel because obviously it only has 1 health at this point, so we don't want to trade 1 for 1 with Pascal. We see them ink Maleficent Dragon, which tells me this is the control variation instead of the aggro variation. They're going to play a Maleficent, draw a card, and quest with Pascal. Just typical Ruby Amethyst things. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that because they inked a Friends on the other side, next turn they're going to be singing Friends on the other side with the Maleficent. We do unfortunately top deck a Lantern, so we have 3 uninkables in our hand. In our deck we don't run too many uninkables, so this is really unlucky, but yeah, you know, we have time, we have a lot of board presence over our opponent, so we do kind of have one turn, I guess, to miss ink. It's not ideal, and it never really happens with this deck, especially because you run so little uninkables, but I guess it just does happen sometimes. My opponent's going to go ahead and bounce back their Maleficent without questing, so my opponent should have quested there. Slight misplay from my opponent, but they're going to take out my queen, leave their Mim on 1 health. We can go ahead and tap the Lantern, and we top deck another Lantern, which is crazy, so good thing we played the Lantern last turn, so we can go ahead and play our Rapunzel for free. We top deck 2 queens, so we can go ahead and ink one of the queens. Again, just the flexibility of the Lantern is just coming in really strong. I'm going to go ahead and trade my mini for this Mim here, just because I don't want him to bounce back the Mim with a snake, and then they just kind of get this like whole bounce loop going that we just can't really compete with, especially not with our current hand. Thankfully, we do have enough ink with the Lantern on the board to play a Tremaine next turn, so if they only play one character, we can Tremaine if we want. They do go ahead and play the Surfer Mini and ink a Maleficent. I think this is a huge misplay. I think you want to play the Maleficent there and draw cards, especially based on the current plays that I'm seeing. I don't think they have too much in their hand that we should be worried about. Because I have such a strong board over my opponent, I spend this turn just playing 2 Lanterns. So I have 3 Lanterns on the board now. I think I'm playing 4 Lanterns at this point in time. This was quite early on in the testing. So I go ahead and ink the other queen and then just quest. I think at this point I can just start turning my cards sideways and I should be pretty good. I can play these Surfer Stitches for quite cheap because I have the 3 Lanterns. Ruby Amethyst doesn't have a way to get rid of items either, so I can just play them as freely as I want to, since I know that they're not going to get taken out anytime soon. I still do have the Tremaine. Although I do have 2 cards in hand, I do have options. I have the Tremaine if they opt to play something quite big, or even if they just leave mini on the board, I can just clear the whole board completely, or I can go for the Surfer Stitch and just draw some more cards, which I think is the better option at this point in time. They do go ahead and Dragonfire my Rapunzel, so that tells me just again they just have absolutely nothing. I'm going to go ahead and use my Lantern to play Rockstar Stitch. It's important to draw cards before you ink, because you might find something better to ink. In a situation I do find just loads of stitches, so I ink the 1-cost Stitch. I don't think I really need it. I think at this point I have enough ink where I can just play the Rockstar for free anyway. You could probably not ink anything here is kind of an option, because then you can go Rockstar Stitch and then start drawing cards with the 1-cost. So I think there it might actually be better to just not play anything. Like I say, this game was played really early on in testing, so there was quite a few misplays on both sides. Also, I think at this point I was quite low on the Pixelborn ladder. I don't really play much on Pixelborn unless I'm recording. It's more in real life for me where I play. But again, we have another Surfer Stitch if we want to draw some more cards next turn, which we definitely are going to. My opponent's going to do the same thing. They're going to play a Maleficent to draw a card. So they are drawing a lot of cards. They're just not really finding anything. I think taking out their Madam Mim Fox was just really good on my part. It disabled them to start doing like bounce loops. Like I say, I have 3 Lanterns here, so I top deck a 4th one. I can play another Surfer Stitch, draw some more cards, and at this point in the game, it's basically over. There's not really much my opponent can do. I have 4 Lanterns on the board that there's no way they can get rid of, and in my hand, they don't know this, but in my hand I have 2 removal tools. My board is way stronger, so yeah, I think the game plan that you want to do against Ruby Amethyst, I know this game was just quite choppy. You just want to out-tempo them so much to the point where they are forced to have Be Prepared on turn 7 or they just lose. And even if you have Mufasa and they Be Prepared you on turn 7, Mufasa hopefully hits just some insane target and then you just keep going from there. And it kind of just, it feeds itself really. Although in this game we didn't find Mufasa, but we did find the cards that you want to hit off Mufasa, so we can just pretend that our Lanterns were kind of like Mufasa in this case and got us our cards for cheap. Opponent, you know, not really doing much. They have an Ursa's Cauldron on the board, but I think at this point it's just too little too late. They don't have enough ink to use Be Prepared or anywhere near to Be Prepared. I think they just might have too many uninkables in their deck, so maybe it was a deck building error on their behalf. So I go ahead, top deck a Maui. Like I say, at this point it doesn't really matter what I do. I can just kind of quest with everything. And as you can see, I'm just tapping all my Lanterns. I play a 1-cost Maui, and then I still have enough ink to play Tremaine or Rockstar Stitch if I want. Take out the Maleficent so they can't bounce it. And then, yeah, I'm at 19. They don't have enough ink to Be Prepared, so it's kind of just game at that point. Really apologise for this Ruby Amethyst game. I really wish that I had time to do more, but unfortunately it is Christmas, it is the holidays, so I am super busy. But this was the best Ruby Amethyst game I could get. But the principles still stand. You just want to just completely out-tempo your opponent, until when they start using their removal, it's just too late. Or if they do use their removal, they're doing it into Mufasa's, which is just replacing itself. But yeah, that was Ruby Amethyst, and that was the video. I hope you guys really enjoyed this guide. As I say, I have the discard ultimate guide coming out at some point next week. Just keep an eye out for that. Hopefully you learn just a load of information from this. I hope you're motivated to go play some Mufasa, take it to your events, and go climb the Pixelborn ladder. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.